Hi, this is Len Epp from Lean Pub, and in this episode of the Back Matter podcast, I'll be talking with Marie Force. Marie is a New York Times best-selling author of contemporary romance novels. She's the author of a number of series, including the Fatal series from Harlequin and the Gansett Island series, which she published independently. Her books have sold more than 6 million copies, and amongst her other accomplishments, including being a popular conference speaker and presenter, she has been nominated twice for the Romance Writers of America's Rita Award for Romance Fiction. Marie is also spearheading the Indie Author Support Network for indie publishers, encouraging people in the flourishing community of indie publishing to get together and organize in an effort to promote their interests as a group. In this interview, we're going to talk about Marie's career, the hard and to many people surprisingly complex work and entrepreneurialism that's essential for flourishing as an indie author, and we'll focus on the inspiration behind the Indie Author Support Network, what it aims to do, and how you can join. You can find out more about the network at indieauthorsupportnetwork.com, and you can follow the network on Twitter at author_indie. You can also follow Marie on Twitter at Marie Force, and you should check out her excellent website at marieforce.com. So thank you, Marie, for being on the Lean Pub Back Matter podcast.
Thanks for having me, Len.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. I know you've written about this extensively on your website, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your career path on the way to becoming an author.
Sure. So I'm from the Newport, Rhode Island area, which is northeast United States, and grew up in this area, lived here my whole life until I married a guy in the Navy, ended up going to Spain, Maryland, Florida, before coming back to Rhode Island almost 16 years ago now. And so I've got two kids who are 22 and 19, and one's out of college, one's in college. And I've always been a professional writer. I started out as newspapers and then into corporate communications for 16 years, and always editing, writing. It's the only, like I joke, it's the only thing I'm good at. My one talent is able to put a sentence together, and it's gotten me through a lot of career alterations. And then later, always said I wanted to write fiction, but I had never really gotten around to doing it. And my parents were very into me doing it. They thought it would be, because I was always a big storyteller. Always. Like I couldn't just come home and say, oh, something happened at school today. I had to put my own spin on it. And they could tell I was doing it because I would get very animated. So I think the storytelling thing goes way back in that regard. So they were always very keen on me doing it. And then my mom got sick, fatal illness, blah, blah, blah. And that kind of gives you a kick to get moving. I was 38 years old, and it's like, okay, someday is here now. I wrote and finished my first book, Treading Water, in May of almost exactly, what's today, the 17th. So tomorrow will be 12 years since I finished my first book in the basement of my former house. And I've written 67 since then, and as of the end of May, sold 7 million. So we, it's kind of been kind of a crazy little path. I was very rejected at first. Nobody wanted my first 6 books. I sold my 7th one to a small publisher. Nothing really happened. It was kind of like that, like little steps forward, nothing really happened. And then in 2010, I started indie publishing. In 2011, I started indie publishing the Gansett Island series. And that series took off like nobody's business and has now sold over 3 million books. And book 19 in that series is out later this month with absolutely no end in sight. And then the Fatal series has done really well. I've been writing both of those series for 12 years. And then I have 3 others that I'm working on at the same time. So 3 other series that I contribute to on a regular basis. So the indie publishing thing has been really, really good to me. I've also been traditionally published the entire time for the last 10 years consistently. And I have my 13th book coming out from Harlequin at the end of this year. So, just kind of doing everything involved with publishing.
Yeah. Thanks for that great summary, and congratulations on the milestones.
Thank you.
Going back closer to the beginning, you mentioned that you first worked in journalism, and from your profile online, I saw that you studied journalism and political science. And I was wondering, if you were starting out now, do you think you would study journalism?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Definitely. Because if for no other reason, then I really feel like journalism training taught me how to write. I'm a very, I like to say like a lean, mean, economical writer. Like I try not to, there's not a lot of extra crap in my books that has to then be edited out. And that comes directly from the journalism training where they teach you, the KISS, keep it stupid, keep it simple, stupid. And, that's like, if you want great training, work for a small community newspaper where you're understaffed, underfunded. The demands are enormous and you're writing, 6 or 8 articles a day sometimes, and you really do just kind of like figure out how to tell a story in a very clear, concise way. And I think that training was absolutely essential to everything that I've done since then.
Are you at all concerned about the current state of affairs with respect to journalism and local journalism and things like that? It's a debate that I like to follow.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things. I do try to keep all of that out of my author life because, I try to keep the perspective that I'm in the entertainment business and, my readers don't really care what I think about, politics and all this stuff, but I am concerned about the propensity of fake news to be overtaking the facts. And I do think that it's a very clear cut threat to our democracy. And I will say that to anybody who asks me. I think that there's a lot of things that are happening in our country right now that are disturbing and alarming. And, and the threat to the free press is definitely one of them. And so I think it's, I can't imagine what has to be going on in journalism schools across the country right now. And my son is actually studying communications and hopes to go into sports broadcasting. And he's getting a lot of information about that from his professors right now. And, I just really think there's never been a more important time for journalism to be thriving than right now.
One of the things I really liked about that answer was that you didn't necessarily connect studying journalism in university to exclusively the utility of doing that to getting a job in journalism. You said it helped you become the writer that you are today.
Right. And, and I'm still close with one of my journalism professors from college. And one of the things I've said to her over the years is I think we put too much emphasis on the media jobs. And the newspapers, the radio, the TV, like that was the focus. You were one of those 3 when we were in school. And one of the things that like so many of my friends that I graduated with have gone on to do so many different cool things. I mean, one of them is the media director for a women's NBA team. And another one, works for, They've worked for nonprofits. I worked for nonprofit for 16 years as the communications director, and all of that journalism training came into play every single day. But like when we were in school, it was like newspaper, TV, radio, boom, boom, boom. So it's nice to know that like that skill that you have can be so universally used across a number of different areas.
One part of your biography that touched me was you talk about the time when your husband was working on an aircraft carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy. And one time for another podcast, I interviewed someone who was on the being on the aircraft side of things. But I wanted to ask you what it's like to be the spouse who's on the land when their spouse is on the aircraft carrier kind of things. I mean, because I think at the time you were working in your carear in communications, corporate communications, and you had 2 kids that they were on land with you, not on the boat with your husband. What was that like?
About hiring a baby to have them come in, because I worked from home while he was deployed and on the Kennedy. I worked for the same company I worked for in D.C. They kept me on when we moved to Florida. And so I was doing it all from home, and I had 2 kids, and my husband was deployed. And I used to think Navy wives were kind of grumpy. And then I realized I had it kind of easy for this first 6 years when he was in office jobs. And then this totally sucked. But I hired the babysitter, and the kids know I'm in the office, so they're like banging on. They were little, they were like they were like 6, new and brand new and 3 years old when we first were moved to Florida, and he was on the Kennedy. And so then the next 3 years we were in that boat. And so I hired the babysitter. They know I'm in there, so there's nothing getting done. So the next day I have her come again, and I tell them, "Oh, Mom's leaving. I'll see you later, and you guys be good," and blah blah blah. And I walked out of my house, walked around to the back of my house, and crawled to the window to go to work in my office. So I mean, those years are like such a blur to me now because it was intense. And one thing I do remember about when he was on the Kennedy was on 9/11. He was in the cryptology community, so he was on the receiving end of all the message traffic that came in. And one of the most important, incredible moments in his entire career in the Navy was when the Kennedy was sent to New York to protect the U.S. motherland. And in 20 years of being in the Navy, I mean, it still gives me chills. He retired a short time after that. He had never seen a message like that. So they were going to maneuvers in Puerto Rico that day, and they were redirected to the New York shoreline after the attacks in the city. And we found out about it on the CNN crawler. That's how we found out that the Kennedy was being sent to New York. So, and all you can think of is if people are, bombing the U.S., like what a sitting duck, a big U.S. Aircraft carrier would be sitting off the shore. So those were, it was. For the most part, we didn't have a lot of stress when, of those, of worrying about something happening to them while they were at sea. But that was a definite exception that day. But those were crazy years. I don't even remember a lot of it.
How long is the person on the boat at a time? I've heard, 3 months, 6 months. The
longest was 6 months. He did one 6-month deployment, and this was the third time he'd been on a carrier in his career, but it was the first time he was on a carrier with a family. They were in a very intense deployment cycle while he was on the ship. So I want to say out of 3 years, he was probably deployed for about 20 months of it. So, which was brutal with a brand new baby who didn't sleep for the first 18 months. And he's the one that's a freshman and will just finish his freshman year of college now. And then the other one had been with daddy during the day until daddy goes on an aircraft carrier and disappears, So, he worked nights when we were in the DC area. So they were constant companions, and then he disappears. So those were crazy years. They really were. And my dad would say to me, when are you going to start writing that book? And I would just look at him like, are you crazy? And he goes, well, what are you doing from 3 to 6 a.m.? I was like, oh yeah. So my parents were very eager to see me take this path that I ended up taking. And my father has father of the author business cards that he gives out to everyone and tells people things that he shouldn't tell them, guess how much she paid for our house and things like that. He's in his 80s.
I want to ask you about the writing, but I've got one more. You just reminded me of a very old personal memory I had, which was that my dad once, when I was very young, went up north in the province of Saskatchewan in Canada to do scouting for a provincial park. And he was gone for about 2 whole weeks. And when he came back, I could barely recognize him. And apparently my brother and I kind of ran to the door, Daddy's home, and then he appeared with a beard and we ran away.
My kid, they had to especially my younger one, because he was he was a baby. And so every time daddy came home, it was who's that? Which was very hard on my husband. So yeah, it all seems like a very long time ago now. He'll be out for 17 years this year, and he retired at 40. So he's still young, so yeah.
And so your first novel, you were basically kind of visited in your imagination by a character from it long before you began writing it. Is that correct? I was wondering.
It is true. Yeah, I was having conversations with Jack Harrington for years before I wrote the first word, and it was an architect whose wife is injured in a very mysterious accident, and I wanted to kind of put him through the ringer, because the thing I loved about writing that book, and I still love about that book, is that he's a 43-year-old guy. And I think by that age, most of us feel like we know ourselves pretty well. We know what we would do in certain circumstances. And then you're presented with something that's so far outside your realm of comprehension. And then suddenly all the rules that you've lived by for all your life are suddenly no longer in play. And, he's told by doctors that his wife is never going to recover. He has 3 teenage daughters he has to contend with, and who have mostly been brought up by their mother at that point, because he's the one out, running a business and earning a living, and has to become a custodial parent to 3 teenage girls who are traumatized after witnessing the accident that injured their mother. And then he, a year later, meets somebody at work, and, he's not looking for it. He's not on Match.com, so I loved presenting him with that dilemma of, here's this guy who's the most solid, one of his friends describes as the most solidly married human being ever, who's now in this state of limbo at 44 years old. And, what do you do? So, and I really, Treading Water is I still look back at that as that dilemma of what do you do when you think you know yourself, and then there's something comes along that makes you question everything. I loved writing that. I loved writing the conflict of it. And then I ended the book 12 years ago. No, it's actually 13. God, I can't even do basic math. 13 years ago tomorrow. It was 155,000 overwritten words. It was a beast. I threw everything in there, which I've never done again in almost 70 books. I've never made all the mistakes that I made in that one. And then when I finally published that on my own, 7 years later, it was the same exact book at 92,000 words. So I learned all those lessons, of what not to do in treading water. But it's still a reader favorite. It's my most frequently asked question is, when is there going to be a 5th book in that series, which there is going to be one more book in that series. They've worn me down. So there is going to be one more book in that series. So, but yeah, so it was just a really crazy process of sitting down and actually doing it for the first time.
And so you began by self-publishing, but you said you eventually got a book picked up. What was that process like for you, learning about how to approach publishers? How did you go?
So I actually was traditionally published first.
Oh, you were? Oh, okay.
Yes, I was traditionally published in 2000. In 2010, I was a debut author with Harlequin's Carina Press with my Fatal series, which is now with HQN. And that's the one that's going to be book 13. So I've always been, without fail, under contract to one publisher or another. And right now I'm currently working with 2. I'm with Harlequin still, which is under HarperCollins now. And then Kensington is doing a historical romance series for me. And they're also bringing out my Gansett Island paperbacks, which is really exciting. So I've always worked with publishers. But then, I had a lot of books already written. And we shopped, the Gansett Island series, I love to say, was rejected, thankfully, by every publisher in romance, which was actually a huge break, a lucky break, with hindsight, a very lucky break. Because if any of those no's had been yes, I probably would have settled for a really crappy deal. And another publisher would still own the rights to those books. And I would have, let's face it, if you sell 3 million books of a self-published series, that is going to change your life in ways that you cannot begin to imagine. And it has. It's been unbelievable what has happened because of that. And so I think all the time, like, oh, thank God I got all those rejections, which were so hard to take at the time. I mean, it was awful. Like, some of the people that rejected it were like, if they had said yes, I would have been like, oh, I would have been like almost embarrassed to say I was published by them, So it was crazy the way it all worked out. Sometimes I think my mom was up there going, just hold out. It's all going to be good. And one of my favorite quotes about it all too is that luck is the convergence of preparation and opportunity. And I was preparing for this lucky opportunity for years without even knowing it. So I was ready when the self-publishing doors opened. I was in a very lucky position.
It's funny, in the startup world, there's a saying about an overnight success that was years in the making.
A 10-year overnight success story.
Yeah. I'm curious about this. When you say you were getting rejected, a little bit about the mechanics of that. Like, did you have multiple kind of submissions out at the same time?
I have them somewhere. Let me see if I can pull them out for you. I carry them around with. I'll show you because Len and I are on Skype, so he could see them. But yeah, here they all are. I saved them all. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Actually, funny story. I was at a seminar once and I had them with me. I was like, I love to show authors like, yeah, my career's going really well, but look at where it started. So I forgot them at the podium, and my niece who works for me, she went running back to get them, and they had been put in a garbage can, and she had to go like practically dumpster diving to get them back. She goes, those cannot be thrown out. So,
yeah, I've heard about people using rejections for wallpaper as kind of inspiration. And
I could cover my whole office. I prefer to cover my office with pictures of the bestsellers. So
I can see that. That's fantastic. It reminds me. Of course, the history of writing is full of stories about William Golding, for example. I believe sent The Lord of the Flies to like 24 publishers before it got accepted somewhere. But one of the really interesting things, and of course, Walt Whitman self-published, so did Nietzsche, But one of the really interesting things about your story is that because of the way you can be a success now in self-publishing, getting rejected actually turned out to be the best thing that could happen for you, because you could go and sell it on your own. And how did you do that? I mean, so for people listening who are like, how do I do that? What did you do? Did you just go on KDP, or did you do more?
I did. At first, all there was KDP. I don't know why it just switched over so that it's only you and not me, but so there was only KDP at the time. There was no option to publish anywhere else. I was there when Nook Press came along. I was there when iBooks came along. I was there when Kobo started up. But so I did just go to, I had all these books written. I had all these readers from the early books saying, hey, I would love to read more of your stuff. And then I had, publishers saying, oh, well, I can't sell that book. And for a long time, it made me wonder, what the heck does that mean? Because later I realized what they meant was the distributors didn't want that book. So if the distributors don't want it, those are the publishers' customers. So a lot of people don't realize that readers are not the customers of publishers. Distributors are, and they're the ones that put books on shelves and they put books into stores, and they're the ones that kind of govern, what gets published. And so I didn't understand that at the time. And it took me a long time to understand what I was being told when somebody would say, oh, I can't sell that book. I'm like, but wait, I can, so when this opportunity came along, I was like, go direct to the readers, sign me up, absolutely. So, the biggest concern that I had at the time was I was under contract to two publishers at the end of 2010 when I had books coming out in early 2011, and nobody could tell me, not an IP lawyer, not my agent, nobody could tell me if I was going to get sued for doing this. So I was very quiet about it at first. I was very okay, so I put them up. The first two books were single titles. They weren't part of a series. I put one up in November and one in December of 2010. And I didn't publicize them on Facebook or do anything other than just put them on sale. And I left them to just, and then I had the one publisher book came out January 3rd and the other publisher book came out February 1st. And on February 1st, the book that came out that day, the publisher of that book put an earlier book of mine with them on sale for free, which was the first time free really was just unbelievable. I mean, my numbers went crazy that week. All myself, I had sold something maybe 300 copies of my indie books, the two indie books at that point. And then I sold 10,000 in February of that month. And then, my numbers kind of went crazy and they've never really come back down, which is, amazing when you think about it. That was, 6 years ago and 7 years ago. See, I can't do basic math. 7 years ago. And it's been gangbusters ever since. And then in April, May, and June of 2011, I published the first three Gansett Island books, 3 months in a row. And it's ironic that this year we're doing the same exact schedule, April, May, June, for the paperbacks, which are going to be are out in stores now. So, it's kind of a full circle moment that the mass market paper is coming out at the same exact schedule as the ebooks did way back when. But, that series it changed everything. And then it was something like 80,000 ebooks for 2011. And next thing you know, I'm giving my notice in my day job, which I had expected to keep for another 10 years because I had that 2021 date in my head because my youngest would finish college that year. So, it was May, whatever, 2021, I can quit my job. But it was crazy. I mean, it's just the way it all happened. And then my good friend who I worked with at the day job, I kept joking with her that she was going to be my assistant someday. And we joked that we had a shed in our backyard she could live in and we would provide Wi-Fi and, and by the end of 2012, I was hiring her and she's worked for me for 5.5 years now. And then I have 3 other employees that, I figure it can either go to taxes or it can go to them. So
yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So, you said earlier when you were talking about your schedule, you said we, and I know from your website that you have a team of people that you work with.
I do.
And I wanted to ask you about that because I think a lot of people often have a view of an author being someone who is kind of isolated and, has a lot of, it's sort of funny that the typical idea would be that an author is someone who's protected from the business side of things by the publisher who does all that for them.
Right.
But the publisher is doing all that, has to have the moxie and has to have the energy and has to do the hard work. And so when you're an independent author or, a hybrid author, I guess, like you are,
right.
The indie part is a business. It's a small business and it
really is.
And it's one that you run and you've got employees and you have to do the taxes and all that. And I wanted to ask you, what do you have your employees doing?
So what you said about it being a small business, it is that, and it is also a 24/7, 365 international business, which is something that I don't think a lot of people realize. Like, we're dealing with people. Like I was communicating with a reader in South Africa earlier today. I mean, like, it's a world business. It's an international business. It's not just like, what we do in the US and Canada, but it's all over, for one thing. And then my employees, like, I have my whole life set up so that really I focus almost exclusively on the writing. And people say to me all the time, like, oh, where do you find time to write? I'm like, oh, where do I find time to write? Like, that comes before anything, like I am working on 2 books right now. And in the month I'm having this fantastic month of May where I've done 46,000 words on 2 different books in May. And I mean, like, that's the bread and butter of the business. I mean, without that, there is no business. So where do I get the time? Like, that comes first. And so my employees basically run my business. I have a COO who oversees everything. And then I have a CFO who is our, financial person, and she deals with all the taxes and she's the one who emails me and says, hey, as of March 31st, you've sold 7 million books. Like, that's how I know that. It's because I've got somebody keeping track of that. My husband got laid off from his job almost 5 years ago. And like, to me, I was like, yes, so I put him to work, and, he kind of takes care of everything else. So like, I'm like in this bubble where like all I do is write and take care of, obviously I tend to the business, the social media. I do all the social media and the email stuff myself. I feel like it's very important that the readers, when they think they're talking to me, they're actually talking to me. And I think that there's been a lot of benefit to that personal touch. And they feel like they know me. And I think that that's really important. So other than that, and obviously dealing with, things like the Indie Author Support Network and running an author support network on Facebook for 7,000 authors now, those things keep me busy during the day. But the focus is always on the writing. There's literally nothing comes before that. Except coffee. Coffee does.
Of course. I've got a bit of an in the weeds indie publishing question for you.
Sure. I love the weeds.
I guess there are 2. One is, when you're interacting with readers, how does that happen? Do you give out your email address?
Yeah, I do.
Promiscuously, like it's just all over the place.
I'm very promiscuous.
Yeah, I wanted to say that's a really interesting thing that you say that, because I think a lot of people are shy about their email address. And I've encountered this doing various different projects in the past, where there seems to be a positive correlation between the openness with which someone treats their email address and their, to put it in crude terms, success. People who hide their email addresses tend to be the ones who are like, why is nothing ever taking off for me? And I don't know what the connection is there, but
they hide behind a lot of things. Like those are the same people that will tell you they hate Facebook. And I always feel like saying, I'm sorry for you. If you're an author and you hate Facebook, that's sorry. I'm sorry for you. I mean, Facebook is where the readers are, and Twitter is where the readers are, and Instagram. I mean, like, those are like free tools that authors years ago would have killed for. And email is another one. Remember the days when you've all heard the stories where, like, the early authors would have to like wait for letters to come from their publishers. Like thank God those days are over. I don't think the indie revolution could have happened in those days. It just wouldn't have. It was fueled by email, and, we are such, like, talk about promiscuous. We're promiscuous about our mailing list. Like, we all want, more people to join us, and that's direct contact with our customers, which is hard to come by when you're dealing with retailers. So, we're so lucky to be working in this modern era of incredible technology, although we are beholden to it. Like, I was out to lunch today with my son, my father, my cousin, and I'm like, don't touch the phone. Don't touch the phone. Leave the phone in the pocket. And I mean, I have to physically tell myself, don't look, So,
and how do you deal with negative contact with people? Like, when, because that's one of the famous things about, or infamous things about things like Twitter, is that, sometimes you encounter the trolls that can happen in email as well.
They're out. Yes. All right. So, block is your favorite thing on social media. If somebody's going to give you a hard time, like, take them out of your social life. I mean, like, just like you would if, somebody was going to hassle you in person, like, would you go out to dinner with them? No. So why do you have to still be friends with them on Facebook? You don't. So, I mean, I just like, I'm a very positive person and I don't do drama. Like, I'm very like, when I hired each of my colleagues, who are, of course, obviously were my friends and in some cases family members, I told them, I said, you guys know me. I don't do drama. So if you're going to do drama and have girl fights and all that stuff, keep it far away from me because I don't want to deal with it. Like, I don't do drama of any kind. So I don't do passive aggression. And so, like, if you're going to come at me, like, I'm probably going to ignore you for one thing. I mean, and I try to, like, I always say to people too, like, if I'm happy with my books, I'm pleasing my first customer is myself. And so hopefully everybody else will be pleased too, but you're never going to make everybody happy, not in a million years. So giving up that goal of, 100% 5-star reviews is just, it's very freeing, So, I mean, I really just frankly don't care if somebody doesn't like what I'm doing or they don't like me. I'm like, oh, well, sorry, I can only do me. So, I mean, you just let some of that go. I mean, there is negativity. Of course, there's always going to be, but I try to put out the positive, and I find that most of what comes back to me is equal to that. So
that's a fantastic answer. Thank you very much for that. I think that will give me a little bit of inspiration the next time I encounter some negativity because I can.
Yeah, it's so easy. It's so easy to
things personally.
Yeah, it's like it's too easy to engage in. And Julie, my assistant, always says to me too, like, she can't believe some of the stuff people will say to me, over Facebook or, in an email. And to me, it's just like, it's that anonymity that we can all hide behind in the keyboards that make us all very brave and in some cases very rude about things that we would never say to somebody's face, and so but you can't take it on. I mean, like, that's obvious. That's not my problem. If you're going to, like, if somebody who's going to come at you and say something really nasty, like, you're not the problem, like, like, they've got other problems besides the fact that they don't like your books. So,
yeah, I think one thing I found is that often I would say like 9 times out of 10, someone who sends an angry email regrets it basically the moment they send it. And a polite reply often elicits an apology. And
yeah, I've been tempted a couple times, and I have done it to say, "Are you having a bad day?" Like,
yeah, did you skip breakfast?
I don't know. Like, of course, I write sexy romance, so there's a lot of commentary about that, which is just like, people in the U.S. are very juvenile in some cases, and their approaches to all things, related to sex. And like, I love to tell people, like, when they come at me, they'll say something like, about my books, and I'll just be like, you too are the result of a sex act. And that usually ends the conversation rather abruptly because nobody wants to think about their parents in that context, So, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Actually, that before I move on to my second in the weeds question, actually, I did have another one, which was that you didn't start out writing erotic fiction, but you did start doing that. If I understand correctly.
So my books have always been very sexy. I would say my heat level is on a scale of 1 to 5 is probably most of them are 4. But I did add an erotic romance series called Quantum in 2015, and it's been very popular, and I've really enjoyed writing it. I'm writing the second to last book now, and I'm going to do 8 total. And the readers are bummed that there's not going to be more, but I feel like I've kind of done what I wanted to do with that series, and I have other things I want to do. So that's the only reason why, I would end it. But I really have enjoyed writing it, and it's all good. I mean, it's just, you got to write what you want and not worry about what people are going to say. And I write under my real name too, which is another whole issue. I mean, everybody thinks that my name has to be a pen name because Force, but it's actually my married name. I married well in the name department. And fortunately, my husband's siblings have always been very supportive of my career. And I like to think that my late in-laws would be too, because they were very supportive of me. So, but you just gotta, if you're going to write sexy romance under your real name, you have to own it. Like, you can't be like, a wilting flower about it. So, and my kids have been they're very confident, they can handle it. And they've had a few things said to them here and there. And like one of them, my older one, had somebody say to her, some crack about what I write. And she came right back and said, yeah, my mom's books are paying for my college. What's your plan? So, and I was so proud of that response, like not being a jerk, but just be like, yeah, well, this is the reality of it. And, So, I mean, people will say what they're going to say, and you got to own it. You can't be like, so many people are like this about it. Oh my God, like what you write. And I'm like, yeah, I write it. I love it. I own it. My readers love it.
Yeah, I mean we could have, I think, an entire interview about that subject, the way that sex is this everyday part of our lives, one way or another, and yet it's something that is often taboo.
Yeah, it's like people are so like they're such babies about it, and it's like I don't know. I think it was really interesting to be like, especially like going back to 2012 when the 50 Shades craze was happening, and like everyone I knew was reading those books, and they were like, have you like, and I'm like, I haven't read them, but I've been reading that for years. I mean, that that's not new, right? I mean, like that was the best part of the whole thing to me. Like there was like this revelation to so many people that this genre existed. And I'm just like, and it was really good for those of us who were already writing romance that there was such a craving for more after that. And I do think that that's a big part of the reason why the indie revolution in romance really did so well, is because there was such a craving after the 50 Shades books first came out for more. Where can I get more of this? And it was a very good time to be in the romance. It continues to be. But people are they're just babies about it,
Actually, that leads me to another question, which is, do you think that ebooks played a big role in the development of the self-publishing kind of community, and in particular with erotic fiction?
Absolutely. So when I do like keynotes and stuff for writing groups, one of the things I tell them is that when the Kindle came out in 2007, we knew it was going to revolutionize the way we read, but I don't think anybody at that time really expected it to revolutionize the way we publish too, which, this all, and I am, even as part of the Indie Author Support Network, very grateful to KDP for the opportunities that they have given us. I mean, I'm sitting in my house right now looking out at a beautiful view of water. I got my nice, lovely pool. I mean, all of that is because of KDP. Okay. And then later, iBooks and Nook and Kobo and Google and, foreign opportunities and audio and fill in the blank, all the other things that came afterwards. But it all began with KDP. And yes, there are ups and downs in the author relationship with KDP. And but in the end of the day, I mean, like we're having these conversations because they came first, and and my appreciation for the changes that were made in my life. Not that there was anything wrong with my life to begin with, but it sure is like delightful to be able to pursue the career that you've always wanted, and to have actual readers and opportunities that were not available to me prior to this, not at this level anyway. And it all goes back to ebooks and the Kindle, and it's all began there, as for indie publishers. So I just think there's so many positive things that we could say about, ebooks and the changes that they made in our business and our lives. One of the things that it always amuses indie authors is when we see the statistics come out that ebook sales are down, and it makes us laugh because nobody is counting the indie sales. So how do you know that? So, I mean, we crack up, like, I don't know if it's quarterly or biannually or what it is, but when those reports come out, like, another report or ebook sales are down. Yeah, no, they're not.
Yeah, I had an article in TechCrunch a couple of years ago now, called "The Dark Matter of the Publishing Industry," where I used the dark matter metaphor to talk about exactly that idea. So yeah, to anyone listening, don't worry. Ebook sales are not down.
No, they're not. And there's a massive element that is not being counted. And that's every single independently published book that's published in the world is not being counted when we're hearing that ebook sales are down. What you're hearing is that traditional published ebook sales are down, and that is possibly attributable to the fact that they are often extremely high priced compared to what the indie authors are offering, which I know is, a bone of contention with traditional publishers and, what the indie authors are doing. And I get that. Like, we don't need to charge $9.99 or $12.99 in order to make a very decent profit. We can do a very decent profit at $3.99, $4.99 because we're getting 70% of the take, so we don't need to be at $9.99 to make a decent profit. So, and I understand that there's a huge disparity between what the traditional publishers are charging for ebooks, what indie publishers are charging for ebooks, and that disconnect, is there for sure. But to say that that ebook sales are down across the board without even an asterisk to say this information does not include any of the millions of indie published books is just, it's laughable to me.
It's interesting. One of the inspirations behind this podcast is the way that the way the press writes about the book publishing industry, I guess, could be described as kind of chauvinistic. That it's very tilted towards one side of things. And so there was an article in the New York Times recently where someone said, it was talking about saving Barnes and Noble and stuff like that, and it said that fewer books are profitable now. Which was, I think I know where this person was coming from. They were probably having coffee with someone who, works at a prominent Big Five publisher and is saying that the old model, they wouldn't have put it this way, but applying their model of giving someone, having things come through agents, choose 10 or 15 projects for an imprint a year, give someone an advance, kind of see which ones start taking off, ignore the rest, and then pump all your money for promotions into the one that takes off. He's saying that that's the model that's maybe not as profitable as it used to be.
Well, because the competition is just astronomical now. We're all competing for basic disposable income. We're competing with streaming TV and movies and Netflix and all the different ways that people can expend their limited disposable income budget. And the competition for that money is greater than it has ever been. And not just in the publishing business, but across the board. Look at all the different ways that we can consume media these days, through Netflix subscriptions and, who doesn't have Netflix and who doesn't have, some people can't live without Hulu and some people can't live without some of the other, Amazon Prime and all the various ways. So then that starts to erode at what people have available to spend on other stuff. And, at the bottom of the pile sometimes is the old reading habit. And then you add to that, okay, so the publisher is still putting out X number of books a year, but then you add to that, the however many millions of independently published books that are being put out at a lower price point. And, you've got a competition situation there that is not looking favorable to the higher priced product. And, I just I think your view of how publishing is as an industry is determined by your point, where you're sitting in it, and I just had a whole argument with somebody today, not a real argument because I don't do arguing and I don't drama, but about a blanket statement, how there's no money in traditional publishing for authors. And I'm just that's just frankly not true. Okay. Maybe it was a bust for you, but to make that blanket statement that there's no money in traditional publishing for authors is just, it's not true. Okay. And I reject those universal statements based on one person's experience because, your experience with publishing depends on a lot of different things. And everybody's looking at it looking in from a different angle. And, I have made a very nice amount of money in traditional publishing, and I have nothing bad to say about most of the experiences I've had in traditional publishing. It's been I like to say too, you have a kind of a down month on the indie side and, oh, here comes a nice big advance check from a publisher. That doesn't suck, but granted, those deals, can be difficult to come by. They can be, all these different things, but there is absolutely money to be made for authors in traditional publishing. Absolutely. And I've had very successful relationships with publishers, and I'm, I have nothing bad to say about the traditional side. Is it frustrating sometimes? Yes, because you do have to give up control. And when you're used to indie publishing and you do it all yourself, it can be hard to give up that control. But if you, make the right deal for yourself, it can be very beneficial. So, it just depends on your perspective and where you sit and what your experience has been. And you can ask 10 different people the state of publishing and you'll get 10 different answers based on their personal experiences.
Yeah, that actually maybe gives me an opportunity to circle back to my planned second in the weeds question.
Oh, weeds. I forgot about the second one. Sorry.
No, that's okay. This was a great conversation. one of the debates, and people do come at this from their own perspective and often driven by their own experience with it, one of the questions that people often have in self-publishing or indie publishing is, should I put all my eggs in one basket or should I put my eggs in many baskets, which is, should I just sell my books on, say, KDP, or should I sell them on all the things? And you've taken a pretty clear position on that, but I was wondering if you could explain what that is.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in being everywhere the readers are, meaning all the different ebook platforms, audio, print, foreign. If the readers, I'm on Reddit, Radish, I'm sorry, and all the different various ways to publish. The readers are consuming books from a number of different angles, and so to be everywhere the readers are. Is it a bigger job to tend to multiple retailers than it would be to tend to one? Yes, it is. Does it take time to build a following on all the different retailers? Yes, it does. It's an individual effort on each one. But it's been very beneficial to me. I could live on what I make at iBooks very comfortably, and same with Nook, and not being on those platforms means I'm not making that money, so and reaching those readers and having those opportunities that I have had with those very robust retailers. So, and also with Kobo, I've had a very successful relationship with Kobo, which is, very big in Canada. And it's just been, being part of those communities as well as the Kindle community has been very beneficial to me. And I would be very hesitant to do anything exclusive to any of them. So. Yeah,
thanks for that great answer. Personally, I'm with you on that one. Not in terms of being a successful author, but just as the strategy and the idea of reaching as many readers as you can wherever they happen to be.
Right. Right.
Moving on to the talk about the Indie Author Support Network, which is a project that you're spearheading. And you mentioned you've already had 7,000 people. I think it's 7,000 people sign up for the network, or is it for your Facebook group?
For the Facebook page was in existence for quite some time before we started to, we just kind of so the Author Support Network has been around for a couple of years, and we have gone from 5,000 to 7,000 members since we started talking about the Indie Author Support Network. And so we just figured, we've already got that group, so we're not going to reinvent another Facebook group, So the Indie Author Support Network has about 1,500 members who have joined, and by joined, they fill out a form, and we're asking them to donate $20 towards startup costs, like things like forming a website and getting an email server, and all the admin stuff behind the scenes, possibly some travel for some people to go to Seattle to meet with KDP, and then stuff like that. So we're not calling it dues or anything like that, because we're not officially a membership organization at this time, and I don't know that we will be. But the whole point of it is to try to bring together indie authors and to have somewhere for people to turn when things are crazy. There's been some issues with KU and with accounts being shut down. And we're talking to KDP about that, and we're hoping to meet with them next month and to try to bring back some information, to our members about what's happening, what's being done. And when something goes wrong, especially when it affects a lot of different people and not just a few, I'm really trying to keep it macro versus micro. We've all got various complaints and issues and nits to pick with various retailers and this and that, but I prefer to focus on things of universal concern. We've had conversations with iBooks about, what had seemed to be an outbreak of piracy on the iBooks site, and they've reported back that some progress has been made, and I've seen a definite fall off on the people frantically contacting me looking for help, with books that are popping up on iBooks when they're supposed to be exclusive to KDP or to KU. And so things like that, when there's a big issue that affects a lot of people, we need something in place that we can, work together to kind of try to find a solution that affects everyone, and I'm really trying to stay away from the individual little issues that, everybody has here and there.
So is the idea that, if indie authors are sort of all seeing the same problem and contacting these organizations separately, they might not get any attention, whereas if they're being represented by, say, one or two people who can say, hey, I represent this whole group of thousands of people, then it's
right.
easy
And that
to
is
get
kind
through.
of the idea. Yes. And, we think some of the other writing organizations have a lot of different audiences to serve. And, there's the push pull always between the traditional side and the indie side. And, if you give too much to this side, then that side feels, and I just sort of feel like there needs to be something that's just for indie authors. Because I do think the indie experience is unique, and we're all kind of in it on our own. And there isn't any kind of central place where, we kind of have a place to go to when something goes wrong. And I have good relationships with all the retailers, and I'm actually, putting my own reputation and relationship with them into play with this. And so I'm being careful on how we approach. And, like I said, I don't do drama. So I said that at the outset. Like, I told everybody that joined that, this isn't going to be a place, nonstop bitch fest where we're constantly going after the retailers. And, I want it to be collaborative and cooperative and positive. And, that's the strategy that I'm bringing to it now. Obviously, when we have an outbreak of people, seemingly honest, hardworking authors having their KDP accounts shut down, and it's all happening at the same time, then there is a definite, swell of interest in what we're doing, and we need help, and can somebody please talk to them, and can somebody please help us? And, we did that. Last Friday, we did that. We went to them, we told them what was happening. We told them the kind of conversations that authors were having, which were very, I would think for them, not what they wanted authors to be talking about. And kind of just made them aware of, like, okay, quote unquote, word on the street is this, and try to get some info from them about, like, what they were doing, what authors should do if they felt that they were unfairly, impacted by this, and to try to just give people, like, enough information that they can kind of take a breath and realize, okay, it's not just me. There's a lot of people involved in this. Obviously, it's a bigger situation. They're working on it. Here's what we're doing. It's just like, I think there's comfort in that, and especially when we're all in this on our own. So, so far, that's the kind of stuff we're doing. And obviously, we're all very busy with our own stuff. And so it does become difficult to kind of, like, manage something. So I'm trying to keep it very simple, very simple.
It's interesting. If I understand correctly, one of the big problems that people have, particularly with, I guess it happens on iBooks as well, but particularly what I sort of encounter is descriptions of what happens on Amazon, where basically fraud starts to happen. They kind of ignore it until it becomes a big enough problem for them to deal with it. And then sometimes what they do is they just nuke from orbit. And then a lot of people get caught up in the fallout from that, and then need to get their status reestablished or get back on the ranking list and stuff like that. I don't think that it would be fair to say that they ignore fraud. I think they are constantly working to ferret out, the problem situations, and they are reluctant to say too much about how or what they do, because, you don't want to be giving people a how-to kit on how to, scam the system by saying, oh, well, we're doing this, this, and that. In every conversation I've had with anyone from KDP, it has been conveyed to me that they are taking any kind of potential fraud, and not potential, but actual fraud within, KU very seriously. And they're working on it all the time. They don't come to work in the morning and say, how can we, mess with people? That's not that's not who they are. It's not what they're about. Look at the opportunities that they have given to authors, it's just, but granted, there are issues, there are challenges, they need to be addressed. They are working on it. They have acknowledged, hey, we could probably do better communicating, when something isn't working, we could probably improve, the information that's going out to the community. And we're trying to give them a conduit back to the authors too, to say, hey, this is what's going on, and everybody take a breath, and hopefully by Monday we'll have, so I think in that way too, that it's going to be beneficial to both sides, because hopefully they'll be able to use our network to get words out to authors quickly when they need to about, a situation that might be going on. So there's an organization that's been around in the United States for over a century now. It's changed names, but it's known as the Authors Guild. And I wanted to ask you about that. Are you a member of the Authors Guild?
No, I'm not. No.
And
Yeah.
what's your opinion about them? I mean, I can say, just to sort of say in advance, I mean, I don't know a great deal about the Authors Guild.
Neither do I, truthfully. I don't.
Every
Yeah,
time
I
I
just
come
have had
across them, it
I
seems
haven't
to
had
be.
any contact. I haven't had any need. I mean, I'm sure, like, and I have heard of other authors having, requested information and help from them and have gotten it. And I know that they have a good reputation. I just really don't know anything about them, truthfully. I haven't had any contact. Most of my author, stuff, if you will, has been through the Romance Writers of America, which is, the group that kind of coordinates the romance fiction end of the author spectrum. So I just really haven't had a lot of involvement with other organizations.
Oh, that's really interesting, because one thing I was curious about was what did the Indie Author Support Network develop with a kind of explicit self-awareness, like the Authors Guild isn't addressing our needs.
No, it wasn't anything like that. No, it wasn't. And I mean, listen, there's all sorts of organizations out there that are, the mystery writers and the, this, that, and the other thing that are, they're all the authors in a genre. Okay. Like and all the different ways that they publish. And some of the organizations have struggled with how to accommodate, the indie authors, and how do we classify, what's published and what is, it's just all that nonsense that goes on where you have to try to like set basic, standards for an organization. And so our thing is if you are independently published in any way, then we want to be helpful to you. And there's no minimum income requirements. There's no, somebody actually emailed me and said, hey, I'm small press published, but I'm really interested in what you guys are doing. Could I be a member? I said, you absolutely can be a member, but don't come to me in a year and ask me to take on small press issues, because that's not what we're about. I think by keeping our focus very narrow and very explicitly intended for one particular segment of the author experience, then we are more likely to be able to be effective, rather than trying to be all things to all people. Obviously there is tremendous need for the bigger organizations, such as, RWA stepped up big time for the recent trademark issue where an author trademarked a single word, right, and set off,
cocky,
and rightfully so, a complete brush fire, if you will. And RWA stepped up big time on that, and they put legal resources on it, and they, got Amazon to not take down books with that word in the title until an appeal has been, heard. And I think that that's a very important sort of move for a big organization like RWA to take, and, obviously has greater resources available to it than we do. And also, from the macro standpoint that we're looking at, the authors that were affected by that, excuse me, would be a small number of our members. And so obviously the trademark issue in general would be a macro level issue that we would be interested in. But, individual authors who are caught up in something like that, they're better off going to a big organization that has the resources to kind of combat that, which we do not have. So in that way, I think there's room for collaboration here, and there's going to be limits to what we can do, because we're not looking to, do conferences and contests and things that bring in money, because who has the time to oversee that? We're all running small businesses. So I'm trying to keep it narrow and focused. And I didn't ask the founding members to put up a lot of money, because I'm not going to be giving them a lot of value other than a place to come when there's an issue that everybody's involved in, and how can we as a group address this? And that's our sole purpose.
My last question for you is about bookstores. This is one of the things that people are often for obvious reasons, preoccupied with in the book publishing community, and in particular in the indie publishing community. And I guess two of the biggest things that sort of just are always kind of bleeping on my radar are what's going to happen to Barnes & Noble, and what's going on with the Amazon bookstores. And I was wondering if you just had any thoughts about one or both of those issues.
So I really hope that Barnes & Noble is going to continue to do what it does, because I think it would be a devastating blow to the publishing industry as a whole to lose Barnes & Noble. I think it would change the landscape forever. And I'm not, I've been hoping and praying for a long time that, Barnes & Noble is going to continue to do what it does. And especially like, the Barnes & Noble Press, which obviously is critical to a lot of indie authors. We have a lot of readers on Nook, and we cater to them. And So I'm very hopeful, continue to remain, I've always said, optimistic. I love, and Amazon providing bookstores. It's more places for people to engage with books, and I'm all for that, and books are not going away. I think it's been interesting to see that, I think there's been a slight resurgence in the print business, which is good to see. I know it's funny because my kids, like I said, they're 19 and 22, and they both prefer the print books to digital, because I think they feel like they spend enough time on their devices and they prefer an actual book. And I was on vacation with them recently, and I'm like, look at them, they're toting books like the way we used to, and I was glad they were reading, but But yeah, so I don't think the printed book is going anywhere. One of the big things in the indie world is we have big signings. I actually just went to my first really big one because my son was still in high school. So I was like, oh, I'm not going to go on that circuit until I'm an empty nester, which I was this year. And I went to the first one, and I could not believe the number of people that were toting around like pull carts full of print books that they had signed at these events. And we do huge business at the indie author signings. So I think there's still a huge demand for signed printed books, authors, signing their books. And I see that, like, I sell books direct from my website, and I sell quite a lot of them and sign a lot of books. And I just don't see that going away anytime soon. I think the people who are hardcore readers are collectors of signed books, and I think that will continue to be a big part of what we do.
Well, thank you very much, Marie, for taking the time to do this interview. I really appreciate it. We covered a lot of ground, and I don't know about you, but I had a lot of fun.
It was great. Thank you.